The morning sun crept over the ridge, and Elias Croft stood in the center of his cabin while a dozen men who had called him a fool now stood silent. 3 days had passed since he lit a single fire, and warmth still rose through the stone floor beneath their boots. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 22 degrees below zero, and 2 men in the valley had already lost fingers to frostbite. The settlement of Harlow Creek had burned through half their winter wood supply in 3 weeks, and January had not yet ended. But Elias Croft had not touched his woodpile in 72 hours, and his cabin held steady at 61 degrees. The men who had laughed at his digging, who had called his underground chamber a grave, who had wagered he would freeze before Christmas, those men now removed their hats and asked him questions they should have asked 6 months ago. Elias had arrived in Montana Territory with nothing but a dead wife's memory and a book of Roman engineering. He had survived ridicule, sabotage, and the coldest autumn on record. He had watched his only friend die in a blizzard that his invention might have prevented. Now he stood in a warm cabin while the world outside turned to ice, and the men who had mocked him finally understood what he had built beneath their feet. The story of how Elias Croft came to Harlow Creek begins 8 months earlier, in the spring of 1873, on a mud-soaked road outside of St. Louis. "You're wasting your time," the clerk said, sliding the deed back across the counter. "That particular parcel sits at 6,000 feet elevation. Snow starts in October, does not stop until May. The last man who claimed it abandoned the site after one winter." Elias did not look up from the map spread between them. His finger traced the contour line surrounding the 40-acre plot, noting the steep eastern ridge, the creek that ran along the southern boundary, the dense pine forest marked in crosshatch. What happened to him? Lost 3 toes. Nearly lost his life. Said the cold came through the walls like the walls were not there. The clerk leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, Mr. Croft, that land has buried 2 men already. Plenty of good claims down in the valley, warmer, safer. Why set yourself up for hardship?" Elias folded the map and tucked it into his coat. "Because the valley claims are taken, because I have $47 to my name, and because I do not intend to die." The clerk stamped the deed and shook his head. "Your funeral, friend, literally." Elias walked out of the land office into the April rain, the deed pressed against his chest. He had told the clerk the truth, but not all of it. The $47 represented everything he had left after burying his wife Margaret in Philadelphia 4 months prior. The consumption had taken her slowly, 1 cough at a time, while Elias sat beside her bed reading aloud from the books she loved. History books, architecture books, a particular volume on Roman engineering that she had given him the Christmas before she fell ill. He had read to her about aqueducts, about roads, about the heating systems the Romans had built beneath their floors, stone chambers that captured heat from a single fire and released it slowly over days. Hypocausts, the book called them. Margaret had smiled at the description. "Imagine," she had said, "1 fire lasting 3 days. What a gift that would be." She died 2 weeks later. And when Elias sold their house, their furniture, their life, he kept only 2 things: the wedding ring she had worn for 11 years and the book of Roman engineering. The journey from St. Louis to Montana Territory took 6 weeks by wagon train. Elias spoke little to the other travelers. He ate his meals alone, reading by firelight while families gathered around their own flames and spoke of the futures they would build. A blacksmith named Garrett Holloway tried to engage him in conversation one evening, noting the book in his hands. "Engineering," Garrett said, settling onto the log beside him. "Planning to build something?" "A cabin." "A lot of reading for a cabin. Most men just cut trees and stack them." Elias turned a page. "Most men freeze to death their first winter." Garrett laughed, a genuine sound that caught Elias off guard. That is true enough. I have seen it myself. What is the book teaching you? How the Romans heated their buildings. Underground chambers lined with stone. One fire would heat an entire bathhouse for days. And you think that will work in Montana? I think it is worth trying. Garrett studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Garrett Holloway. I claimed land in Harlow Creek 2 years ago, built a forge there last summer. If you are heading that direction, I would welcome the company. Elias shook his hand. Elias Croft. And yes, I am heading exactly there. They traveled together for the remaining 4 weeks, and in that time, Elias learned that Garrett was one of those rare men who listened more than he spoke. He asked questions about the Roman heating system, studied the diagrams in the book, and offered practical observations without dismissing the idea outright. By the time they reached Harlow Creek in late May, Elias had found something he had not expected to find: a friend. Harlow Creek was not a town so much as a collection of stubborn men who had refused to leave. 18 cabins spread across the valley floor, connected by dirt paths that turned to rivers when the rain came. A general store operated from the front room of a widow's cabin. The blacksmith forge, Garrett's forge, sat at the northern edge of the settlement, its chimney the tallest structure for miles. And above them all, carved into the eastern ridge like a scar, sat the 40 acres that Elias Croft now owned. That is your land, Garrett said, pointing up the slope. The previous owner built a foundation before he quit. Stone and mortar might still be usable. Elias studied the ridge. The grade looked steep, maybe 30 degrees, but the tree line would provide windbreak from the north. The creek would supply water. The elevation would make everything harder, hauling supplies, cutting timber, surviving winter, but it would also provide something the valley could not: granite. The ridge was solid granite exposed in sheets along the upper slopes, exactly what the Roman engineers had used in their hypocausts, exactly what Elias needed. I will need to borrow a pick and shovel, he said. You can borrow whatever you need, but I would hold off on the digging. The other men will want to meet you first. Why? Because the last man who lived on that ridge told everyone in the valley that they were fools for building their cabins the way they did. Said he knew better. Said he had read books. Garrett paused. They did not take kindly to it. When he struggled through his first winter, nobody offered help. When he nearly died, nobody brought him food or firewood. He had made enemies before he even started. I am not here to make enemies. Then I would suggest keeping your ideas to yourself until you have something to show for them. These men respect results. Words mean nothing. That evening, Garrett brought Elias to the general store, where a half-dozen settlers had gathered to drink whiskey and escape the heat. The introductions went smoothly until a man named Cornelius Branch pushed through the group and stood directly in front of Elias. Cornelius was the kind of man who had been big his entire life and had learned to use that size to intimidate anyone smaller. His shoulders filled the doorway. His hands looked like they could crush a man's skull. He owned the largest claim in the valley, ran the most cattle, and spoke at every community gathering as though his opinion was the only one that mattered. You bought the Hendricks claim, Cornelius said. It was not a question. I did. Hendricks was a fool. Are you a fool? The room went quiet. Elias felt the weight of every eye on him, measuring his response. He thought about Margaret, about the book in his saddlebag, about the heating system he planned to build. He thought about what Garrett had told him. I suppose we will find out, he said. Cornelius stared at him for a long moment, then laughed. Fair answer. What do you plan to build up there? A cabin. Just a cabin? Just a cabin. Cornelius nodded slowly, then stepped aside. Welcome to Harlow Creek, Mr. Croft. Try not to die. The summer passed in a blur of labor. Elias cleared his land by hand, felling pine trees with an axe he had purchased on credit from the general store. He stripped the bark, notched the ends, and stacked the logs to dry in the June sun. He rebuilt the stone foundation the previous owner had abandoned, extending it 12 feet in every direction to create a base. Measuring 24 feet by 24 feet, larger than any cabin in the valley, large enough to accommodate what he planned to build beneath it. In July, he began to dig. The settlers noticed immediately. A man named Porter Vance climbed the ridge one afternoon and found Elias waist-deep in a hole at the center of his foundation. "What in God's name are you doing?" Porter asked. Elias wiped the sweat from his face. "Digging." "I can see that, but why? Your foundation is already laid. You should be raising walls, not digging holes." "I need a chamber beneath the floor." "For what?" Elias hesitated. He remembered Garrett's warning, but Porter was already standing there, and the hole was already half finished. There was no hiding it now. "For heating," Elias said. "An underground chamber that holds heat from a fire. The stones absorb the warmth and release it slowly over several days." Porter stared at him. "You are digging a cellar to keep yourself warm?" "Not a cellar. A hypocaust. The Romans used them." "The Romans?" Porter cut him off with a sharp laugh. "The Romans are dead, Mr. Croft, and if you think digging a hole in the ground is going to keep you warm through a Montana winter, you will be joining them soon enough." He left without another word. By evening, the entire settlement knew about the hole. By the following morning, they had given it a name, Croft's Grave. The mockery came steadily after that. Men would climb the ridge on various pretenses, borrowing tools, checking on his progress, offering unwanted advice, but their real purpose was always to see the hole and shake their heads. Cornelius Branch came twice, each time standing at the edge of the excavation with his arms crossed. "Deeper every time I visit," he said during his second trip, in late July. "How far down do you intend to go?" Elias had reached 4 feet by then, the minimum depth recommended in his book. 6 feet total. Then I line it with stone and build the fire chamber. 6 feet. Cornelius shook his head. "You are digging your own grave, Croft, literally and figuratively." "Perhaps." "No perhaps about it. I have lived through 9 winters in this territory. I have seen men freeze to death in their sleep. I have seen cabins buried under snow so deep the doors could not open. You know what kept me alive?" "What?" "Wood. Lots of wood. 3 cords for every month of winter. That is the only thing that matters up here. Fire. Constant fire. You let that fire go out for one night. You die." He pointed at the hole. "That thing you are building? It is a hole in the ground. Holes do not make heat. Fire makes heat. And you cannot keep a fire burning underground." "I do not intend to keep it burning," Elias said. "I intend to burn it once and let the stones hold the heat." Cornelius laughed so hard he had to brace himself against a tree. "Stones? Holding heat? For how long?" 48 to 72 hours, depending on the mass. You are insane." Cornelius wiped his eyes. "Truly insane, but it will be entertaining to watch you fail." He climbed back down the ridge, still laughing. That night, at the general store, he told everyone what Elias had said. The laughter echoed through the valley like thunder. But Garrett Holloway did not laugh. He climbed the ridge the following morning and stood at the edge of the excavation with a different expression on his face. Curiosity. "Show me the diagrams," he said. Elias retrieved the book from his half-built cabin frame and opened it to the section on hypocausts. The illustration showed a cross-section of a Roman bathhouse, a fire chamber at one end, a raised floor supported by stone pillars and vents that allowed heat to circulate from below. The key, the text explained, was thermal mass. Dense materials like granite absorbed heat slowly but released it slowly as well. A sufficient mass of heated stone could maintain a comfortable temperature for days after the fire had burned out. Garrett studied the diagram for a long time. How much stone would you need? The book suggests a ratio of 100 pounds of dense stone per cubic foot of space to be heated. My cabin will have approximately 3,000 cubic feet of interior space, so I would need roughly 300,000 pounds of stone. That is 150 tons. Yes. Garrett looked at the excavation, then at the ridge above them, where granite sheets gleamed in the morning sun. You intend to quarry it yourself? I intend to try. That will take months. I have until October. Garrett closed the book and handed it back. Then you had better get started. I will help when I can. It was the first offer of help Elias had received since arriving in Harlow Creek. He did not know how to respond. Why? He finally asked. Garrett shrugged. Because you might be right, and because if you are right, the rest of us should know about it. They shook hands, and Garrett returned to his forge. Elias picked up his shovel and kept digging. By mid-August, the excavation was complete. 6 feet deep, 12 feet long, 8 feet wide. A chamber large enough to hold the fire, and the stone mass required to heat the cabin above. The walls were solid granite. He had dug straight through to bedrock on 3 sides. The fourth side, facing east, would hold the fire opening. A 3-foot-wide tunnel angled upward to draw oxygen and expel smoke. The lining came next. Elias quarried granite from the exposed sheets on the upper ridge, breaking it into manageable slabs using techniques he had learned from the book. Fire setting, building a small fire against the rock face, letting it heat the stone, then throwing cold water onto the hot surface to crack it along natural fault lines. The method worked, but it was slow. Each slab took a full day to extract, and he needed hundreds of them. The settlers watched his progress with increasing amusement. A man named Douglas Thorne brought his 2 sons up the ridge one September afternoon, explicitly to show them what failure looked like. See that? Douglas said, pointing at Elias hauling a 200-pound slab across the clearing. That is a man who thinks he knows better than everyone else. That is a man who reads books instead of asking the men who actually live here. What do you think's going to happen to him come winter? The older boy, maybe 12 years old, squinted at the excavation. He is going to freeze? That is right, because you cannot heat a house with rocks. Rocks are cold. Fire is hot. Simple as that. Elias heard every word, but did not respond. He set the slab at the edge of the pit, rolled it down the ramp he had built, and began positioning it along the eastern wall. The insults meant nothing. The laughter meant nothing. Only the stones mattered. Only the math. By the end of September, the chamber was lined. Granite slabs covered the floor, the walls, and a raised platform in the center where the fire would burn. Above the platform, Elias had constructed a lattice of iron rods, purchased from Garrett at cost, that would support the massive heating stones. The rods sat 18 inches above the fire platform, close enough to absorb maximum heat from the flames, far enough to allow oxygen flow beneath. The heating stones came next, not slabs this time, but rough chunks of granite quarried from the ridge and shaped into pieces roughly the size of a man's head. Each chunk weighed between 40 and 60 pounds. He needed 5,000 pounds of them to start, enough to test the system, and eventually 15,000 pounds to achieve the heat retention the book described. He worked 18-hour days through the first 2 weeks of October, hauling stones down from the upper ridge in a handcart Garrett had welded together from scrap iron. His shoulders ached, his hands bled. His back screamed at him every morning when he rose from his bedroll. But the pile of heating stones grew steadily, filling the iron lattice until it sagged under the weight. "You need more support," Garrett said during one of his evening visits. He examined the bowing rods with a critical eye. "That mass will collapse the lattice when it heats up. Iron expands when it gets hot." "I know, but I do not have more iron." "I do. Let me reinforce it." They worked through the night, adding crossbars and vertical supports until the lattice could hold twice its current load. When they finished, the first frost had already begun to form on the grass outside. "Winter's coming early this year," Garrett said. "I can smell it." "How early?" 2 weeks, maybe less. You need to finish your walls." Elias had been so focused on the hypocaust that the cabin itself remained only half built. The log walls reached 7 feet on 3 sides, barely high enough for a roof. He had no door, no windows, no chimney for the fire tunnel that connected the underground chamber to the outside. 2 weeks was not enough time. "I will help," Garrett said. "Every day I can spare from the forge." "Why do you keep helping me? The others think I am insane." Garrett picked up a hand axe and tested its edge. "The others laughed at me when I built the forge, said nobody in Harlow Creek needed a blacksmith, said I would starve." He smiled. "I did not starve, and maybe you will not freeze." They worked side by side for 11 days. Garrett recruited 2 other men, Porter Vance's younger brother William, and a quiet carpenter named Samuel Gray, with promises of future work at the forge. The 4 of them raised the walls to their full height of 9 feet, installed a cedar shake roof, cut openings for 2 windows and a door, and built the exterior chimney that would vent smoke from the underground fire chamber. The floor was the critical piece. Elias had designed it with 12 vent openings, each one roughly 6 inches in diameter, positioned to allow heat to rise from the stone mass below. The vents were covered with iron grates that Garrett had cast at the forge, functional but also decorative, with a crosshatch pattern that would become distinctive in the months to come. On October 23, 1873, Elias Croft stood inside his finished cabin and looked down at the floor beneath his boots. Somewhere under that floor, separated by 18 inches of pine planking and a layer of packed clay, sat 8,000 pounds of granite stones waiting to be heated. "When do you test it?" Garrett asked. "Tonight." The first test fire was a disaster. Elias built the fire too small, worried about cracking the stones with sudden temperature changes. He burned half a cord of pine, green wood, the only kind he had available, and watched the smoke pour through the chamber and out the exterior chimney. The fire burned for 2 hours, exactly as the book described. Then he sealed the fire opening with a granite slab, trapping the heat inside, and waited. By morning, the floor was warm, not hot, but warm. Elias pressed his palm against the planks and felt heat radiating up through the wood. The thermometer Garrett had lent him, a mercury instrument from the forge, read 44 degrees inside the cabin. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 19 degrees overnight, a difference of 25 degrees. Significant, but not enough. "The stones are not hot enough," he told Garrett that afternoon. "I did not burn enough wood." "How much do you need?" Elias consulted his book. The Romans had used continuous fires burning for 6 to 12 hours to heat their bathhouse hypocausts, but he did not have 6 hours of wood to burn in a single session. He did not have a ready supply of dry hardwood. He had green pine, which burned fast and cool, producing more smoke than heat. "I need to dry my wood," he said, "and I need more of it. It is almost November. The ground will freeze soon." You will not be able to cut trees." "Then I will cut them now." For the next 8 days, Elias did nothing but cut wood. He felled pine trees, bucked them into 18-inch sections, split the sections into quarters, and stacked the quarters in cords along the south-facing wall of his cabin. The sun would help dry them, or it would have, if the clouds had not rolled in on the 3rd day and refused to leave. The first snow fell on November 1st, 4 inches of powder that melted by noon but sent a clear message. Winter had arrived. "You are out of time," Cornelius Branch said. He had climbed the ridge with 3 other men, ostensibly to check on Elias's progress, but really to witness his failure. "Look at that woodpile. 5 cords? 6? That might last you through December if you burned carefully. What happens in January, February?" "I do not intend to burn continuously," Elias said. "That grave of yours again." Cornelius shook his head. "Did you test it?" "Once." "And?" "It needs adjustment." Cornelius turned to the men behind him. "You hear that? It needs adjustment. The Roman heating system does not work, but it needs adjustment." He stepped closer to Elias, lowering his voice. "Listen to me carefully, Croft. I do not like you. I think you are arrogant, foolish, and dangerous. But I do not want to find your frozen body in the spring, so I am going to give you one piece of advice. Abandon this stupidity and build a proper fireplace. You still have time. There are men in the valley who will help you if you ask. Swallow your pride and do the smart thing." Elias met his gaze. "I appreciate the advice. But you will not take it." "No." Cornelius held his stare for a long moment, then turned and walked back down the ridge. The other men followed. None of them looked back. That night, Elias made calculations by candlelight. The first test had failed because the fire was too small and burned too briefly. The stones had absorbed heat, but not enough to sustain a meaningful temperature difference for more than 12 hours. He needed a hotter fire, a longer burn, and drier wood. The drier wood would come with time. The split logs were already losing moisture in the cold air. The longer burn was simply a matter of commitment, staying awake through the night to feed the fire. But a hotter fire required something more. He returned to the book. The Romans had used hardwood exclusively, oak, beech, ash, because hardwoods burned hotter and longer than softwoods. Pine was the worst possible fuel for a hypocaust. Its low density meant rapid combustion and minimal heat transfer. Its high resin content produced excessive smoke and residue. The Romans would never have used it, but the Romans had lived in the Mediterranean, surrounded by hardwood forests. Elias lived in Montana, surrounded by pine. He would have to make do with what he had. The solution came to him at midnight, half asleep with the book open on his chest. Charcoal. The Romans had not used charcoal in their hypocausts. They had not needed to, but charcoal burned hotter than any wood. Nearly twice as hot, according to a passage he found in a different section of the book describing Roman metallurgy. A charcoal fire could reach 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to 800 for pine. He did not have charcoal, but he knew someone who made it every day. Garrett listened to the idea the following morning, stirring the coals in his forge while Elias explained. "You want me to give you charcoal? Sell me charcoal. I will pay you back when I can." "I burn through 50 pounds a day at the forge. I do not have extra to spare." "Then teach me to make it myself." Garrett set down his poker and studied the fire. "Charcoal making takes weeks. You do not have weeks. Then I will do it while the snow falls. I will make charcoal through November and December, build up a supply, and test the hypocaust again in January. January is the coldest month. If you wait until January, I know, but I do not see another option. Garrett was quiet for a long time. Finally, he reached under his workbench and pulled out a canvas sack. I have been saving this. Emergency supply in case the regular deliveries stop. 80 pounds, give or take. It is yours. Elias stared at the sack. I cannot take your emergency supply. You can pay me back by not dying. Garrett pushed the sack across the floor. Test your system. If it works, we will figure out the charcoal situation together. If it does not work, I will help you build a fireplace. The second test fire happened on November 9th, after 3 days of continuous snow had dropped nearly 2 feet of powder on the ridge. Elias built the fire carefully this time. He started with dry kindling from the interior of his woodpile, built it up with larger splits, and added the charcoal once the flames were well established. The charcoal caught immediately, burning with a fierce, blue heat that made the air above the fire shimmer. He fed the fire for 3 hours, alternating between wood and charcoal, watching the temperature inside the chamber climb steadily higher. The thermometer he had lowered into the fire pit on a long wire read 600 degrees by the first hour, 800 by the second, 1,000 by the third. The granite stones glowed orange in the firelight, radiating heat so intense that Elias could not stand within 5 feet of the opening. At the 3-hour mark, he sealed the fire opening and climbed up into the cabin to wait. The results came faster than he expected. Within 30 minutes, the floor was warm to the touch. Within an hour, the cabin temperature had climbed from 28 degrees to 45 degrees. By morning, 14 hours after sealing the fire, the temperature inside the cabin held steady at 53 degrees. Outside, it was 4 degrees below zero. Elias checked the temperature every hour for the next 3 days. The pattern emerged clearly, a gradual decline of roughly 3 degrees every 6 hours, accelerating slightly as the stone mass cooled. 53 degrees at hour 14, 50 at hour 20, 47 at hour 26, 44 at hour 32. By hour 60, the temperature had dropped to 38 degrees, still 10 degrees warmer than the unheated outdoors. 60 hours of heat from a single 3-hour fire, not quite the 72 hours the book had promised, but close. And the book had described a fully loaded hypocaust with 15,000 pounds of stone. Elias had only used 8,000. More mass would mean more heat retention. More heat retention would mean longer intervals between fires. He had proven the concept. Now he had to prove it could survive a real winter. The news of Elias's second test spread through Harlow Creek within hours. Garrett had witnessed the temperature readings himself and reported them accurately to the men at the general store. 53 degrees inside while the world outside froze. 60 hours of heat from 3 hours of fire. The reaction was not what Elias had hoped. Lies, Cornelius Branch said flatly. The thermometer was broken, or he kept feeding the fire in secret. No pile of rocks holds heat for 60 hours. I watched him seal the opening myself, Garrett said. He did not touch it for 3 days. Then you were fooled, or you're lying along with him. The argument escalated from there. Garrett defended the results. Cornelius dismissed them. Other men took sides, most of them landing with Cornelius simply because he had lived in Harlow Creek longer and commanded more respect. By the end of the evening, the settlement had divided into 2 camps, those who believed Elias had discovered something valuable and those who believed he was a fraud. Elias stayed on his ridge and continued working. The second test had proven the concept, but it had also revealed problems. The fire chamber had cracked in two places where the heat had been most intense. The iron lattice had warped slightly, creating gaps where heat could escape without passing through the stone mass. And the wood charcoal mixture had produced more smoke than expected, leaving a thick layer of soot on the chamber walls that would need to be cleaned before the next burn. He spent the first 2 weeks of November making repairs. He mortared the cracks with a mixture of calcium oxide, andite calcium oxide, andite calcium oxide, and clay that Garrett helped him prepare at the forge. He reinforced the lattice with additional iron supports. He cleaned the soot from the chamber walls and improved the airflow through the fire tunnel by widening the exterior opening. And he began making charcoal. The process was simpler than he had expected, but required constant attention. He built a shallow pit near the tree line, filled it with split pine, covered the pile with dirt and sod, and lit it from a small opening at the base. The fire burned slowly, starved of oxygen, converting the wood into charcoal over the course of 3 to 4 days. Each batch produced roughly 40 pounds of usable charcoal from 200 pounds of wood, a conversion rate of 20%. By the end of November, he had accumulated 200 pounds of charcoal, enough for 4 full burns if he mixed it with wood, enough to test the system twice more before the deepest cold arrived. The third test happened on December 2nd. Elias loaded an additional 3,000 pounds of granite onto the lattice, bringing the total mass to 11,000 pounds. He burned for 4 hours this time, using a higher ratio of charcoal to wood. The chamber temperature reached 1,100 degrees. The floor temperature climbed to 61 degrees within 2 hours of sealing the fire. This time, the heat lasted 68 hours before dropping below 40 degrees. Garrett witnessed the entire test. He brought a second thermometer to verify the readings, recorded the temperatures in a leather journal, and calculated the heat loss rate himself. The numbers matched Elias's calculations almost exactly. "You have done it," Garrett said on the morning of the third day, when the floor still radiated warmth despite the 15-degree temperature outside. 68 hours. That is nearly 3 days from a single fire. It should be longer with the full stone mass. The book suggests 72 hours is achievable with 15,000 pounds. How much more stone do you need? 4,000 pounds. Maybe 2 weeks of quarrying if the weather holds. The weather did not hold. A blizzard swept through the territory on December 5th, dropping 3 feet of snow in 36 hours and trapping every resident of Harlow Creek in their cabins. The temperature plunged to 28 degrees below zero, the coldest reading anyone could remember for early December. 2 horses froze to death in Porter Vance's barn. A section of the general store roof collapsed under the snow weight, and Douglas Thorne's cabin caught fire when a spark from his fireplace landed on a pile of kindling, forcing his family to flee into the storm and shelter with neighbors until the flames burned themselves out. The Thorne family lost everything: their clothes, their food stores, their furniture, their tools. Douglas himself suffered severe burns on his hands and forearms trying to save what he could. His wife and 2 sons escaped unharmed, but they now had nothing except the charity of the settlement. Cornelius Branch organized a collection. Every family in Harlow Creek contributed what they could spare: blankets, preserved food, spare clothing. And the Thornes moved into an empty storage shed behind the general store. It was cramped and cold, barely warmer than the outside air, but it had walls and a roof and a small cast-iron stove that Garrett donated from his forge. "They will not survive the winter in that shed," Garrett told Elias the day after the blizzard ended. "The stove is too small, the walls are too thin, they are burning through wood faster than they can replace it." "What can I do?" "Let them stay in your cabin." Elias stared at him. "My cabin is not ready. The hypocaust. Your cabin is warmer than that shed. I have been inside both. Your floor holds heat even when you are not running the fire. That residual warmth could save their lives. Douglas Thorne mocked me in front of his children. He called me a failure. He did. And now his family is freezing. Does his mockery matter more than their lives? The question hung in the air between them. Elias thought about Margaret, about the months he had spent watching her die, about the helplessness of sitting beside someone who was suffering and being unable to stop it. He thought about the book she had given him, about the dreams she had shared, about the gift of warmth she had imagined. "Bring them up the ridge," he said. The Thorne family arrived that evening, hauling their meager salvaged possessions on a wooden sled. Douglas could not meet Elias's eyes. His wife, a thin woman named Clara, thanked Elias 3 times before crossing the threshold. The 2 boys, the same boys who had watched their father mock Elias's excavation, stood silent and shivering until Elias guided them to the warm section of floor near the center of the cabin. "The floor is heated," he explained. "Sit here, it will warm you faster than the stove." The younger boy, maybe 8 years old, pressed his palm against the planks and looked up with wide eyes. "It is warm. How is it warm? There is no fire." "There was a fire 3 days ago. The stones beneath the floor are still holding the heat." The boy looked at his brother, then at his father. Douglas Thorne stood in the corner of the cabin, his bandaged hands cradled against his chest, his face unreadable. "3 days," Douglas said, quietly. "One fire, and the floor is still warm after 3 days?" 68 hours. The warmth will fade by tomorrow, but I will build another fire then." Douglas said nothing else, but that night, when Elias woke to check the thermometer, he found Douglas sitting alone by the warm floor, his burned hands pressed against the planks, his eyes closed. The Thornes stayed for 2 weeks. Elias built 4 fires during that time, each one lasting between 50 and 70 hours, depending on the conditions. The cabin temperature never dropped below 45 degrees, even when the outside air plunged to 30 degrees below zero. The boys recovered their energy and began helping Elias haul charcoal and stack wood. Clara cooked meals for everyone using the small cook stove Elias had installed in the corner, and Douglas slowly began to talk. "I was wrong about you," he said one evening, while the fire crackled in the underground chamber below. "I thought you were a fool. I thought you would freeze to death and we would bury you in the spring." Many people thought that. I was the one who called it Croft's grave. Did you know that? I suspected. Douglas looked down at his bandaged hands. The burns were healing, but the skin remained raw and painful. "I have built 3 cabins in my life, every one of them the same way. Log walls, stone fireplace, constant fire all winter. That is how my father built his cabin. That is how his father built his cabin before that. It never occurred to me that there might be another way. There are always other ways. Most people never look for them. Most people are too busy surviving to look for anything." Douglas met his gaze. "You lost someone. I can see it in you. That is why you came here, is it not? To escape from something." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "My wife, she died last winter. Consumption. I am sorry. She gave me a book before she passed, Roman engineering. The hypocaust design is from that book. She used to say that one fire lasting 3 days would be a gift." He paused. "She never got to see it work." Douglas nodded slowly. "When my family goes back to the valley, I'm going to tell everyone what I have seen here. I'm going to tell them that your system works, that you are not a fool. Cornelius will not believe you. Cornelius Branch can go to hell." They shook hands, Douglas wincing at the pressure on his burns. And 2 days later, the Thorne family returned to the valley. True to his word, Douglas told everyone who would listen about the heated floor, the 3-day burns, the warmth that required no constant tending. Some believed him, most did not. But the seed had been planted. December turned to January, and the cold deepened. Elias completed his stone mass, a full 15,000 pounds of granite stacked on the reinforced iron lattice, and conducted his fourth full test on January 9th. The fire burned for 5 hours, reaching temperatures that made the chamber glow like a furnace. When he sealed the opening and climbed back into the cabin, the floor was almost too hot to touch. The heat lasted 74 hours. 74 hours of warmth from a single 5-hour fire. 3 full days without touching his wood pile. The book had promised 72 hours, and he had exceeded it. He recorded the results in the journal Garrett had given him, noting the temperatures at 6-hour intervals, the outside conditions, the fuel consumption, the stone mass weight. The data was irrefutable. The system worked. But the coldest weather had not yet arrived. The settlers of Harlow Creek called it the January freeze, a mass of Arctic air that descended on the territory during the 3rd week of January and did not lift for 19 days. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero and stayed there. The creek froze solid to the bottom. Horses died standing up in their stalls. A man named Wilson Crane stepped outside his cabin to relieve himself in the night and was found frozen to death 10 feet from his door, his body rigid as a statue. The wood consumption in the valley became catastrophic. Families that had planned for 3 cords per month suddenly found themselves burning 5, then 6. The general store ran out of dry firewood by January 20th. Men began cutting green timber in desperation, hauling it into their cabins to dry by the fire, burning what they could, and watching the rest smolder and smoke. Cornelius Branch sent his eldest son to every cabin in the settlement with a message: ration your wood, burn only what you need to survive. Help your neighbors if they run short. The community that had mocked Elias Croft for his underground furnace was now facing the reality that their traditional methods were failing them. Elias monitored the situation from his ridge. His wood supply remained nearly untouched. He had burned only 3 fires since January 1st, each one lasting 3 days. His charcoal supply was sufficient for another 2 months, and his cabin stayed warm while the valley below burned through reserves that should have lasted until March. On January 23rd, Garrett Holloway climbed the ridge with disturbing news. Cornelius is talking about taking your wood. Elias looked up from the stone he was splitting. What? He says you are hoarding. He says your woodpile proves you are burning in secret, that the heated floor is a trick, and you're using traditional methods just like everyone else. He wants the community to vote on seizing your supply and distributing it to families in need. That is absurd. Anyone can come see the fire chamber. Anyone can check the temperature readings. They believe what they want to believe, and right now, they want to believe that you have been lying to them, because the alternative is admitting they were wrong. Elias set down his tools. What do you suggest? Fight him. Come to the meeting tonight and defend yourself. Bring your journal, your temperature readings, everything. Make them see the truth. Will they listen? Garrett's face was grim. I do not know. But if you do not show up, they will take everything you have. The community meeting happened that evening in the back room of the general store. 18 men crowded into a space meant for 10, their breath fogging in the cold air, their faces lit by lantern light. Cornelius Branch stood at the front of the room, his arms crossed, his expression set like granite. We all know why we are here, he began. The cold is killing us. Wilson Crane is dead. 3 families are out of wood entirely and surviving only because their neighbors share what they have. And meanwhile, Elias Croft sits on his ridge with a woodpile that could heat half the valley, claiming he does not need it because his magical floor keeps him warm. It is not magic, Elias said, stepping forward from the back of the room. It is engineering, the same principles the Romans used 2,000 years ago. The Romans? Cornelius shook his head. Always the Romans. Tell me, Croft, when you burn a fire, does it make heat? Yes. And when the fire goes out, does the heat remain? Not in open air, but in a contained system with sufficient thermal mass. Yes or no? When a fire goes out, does the heat remain? In my system, yes. Cornelius turned to the assembled men. He admits it. He believes that heat stays after the fire is gone, that rocks hold warmth for 3 days without fuel. That is not engineering, gentlemen. That is insanity. Then how do you explain what Douglas Thorne witnessed? Garrett stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs. He lived in that cabin for 2 weeks. He watched the fires burn and counted the hours. 68 hours, 70 hours. That is what he reported. Are you calling him a liar? Douglas Thorne shifted uncomfortably near the door. All eyes turned to him. I said what I saw, Douglas muttered. The floor was warm, 3 days after the fire. I do not know how to explain it, but I know what I felt. Mass hysteria, Cornelius said. Or trickery. Croft probably kept a small fire burning somewhere, hidden from view. The point is this. We have families freezing, and he has wood he is not using. Common decency says he should share. I will share, Elias said quietly. The room went silent. I will share my wood. I will share my charcoal. I will share everything I have on one condition. You come see the system work for yourself, all of you, tomorrow morning. Watch me build the fire. Watch me seal the chamber. And watch the floor stay warm for 3 days without another burn. If I am lying, take everything I have. If I am telling the truth, leave me alone. Cornelius stared at him. A demonstration? Yes? And if the floor goes cold after 6 hours? After 12? Then I will give you my entire woodpile, every cord. And I will admit I was wrong. The murmurs resumed, louder this time. Men looked at each other, weighing the offer. Garrett caught Elias's eye and nodded slightly. Cornelius seemed to calculate the angles, searching for a trap. Fine, he said finally. Tomorrow morning, every man in this room witnesses the fire. We watch you seal the chamber, and we check the temperature every 6 hours until it drops below 40 degrees or until 72 hours pass, whichever comes first. Agreed. They shook hands, and the meeting adjourned. But as Elias left the general store, Cornelius grabbed his arm. I do not know what trick you're planning, Cornelius said quietly, his grip tight. But I promise you this. When your system fails, I will make sure everyone remembers what a fraud you are. You will never show your face in this valley again. Elias pulled his arm free. I suppose we will find out. He climbed the ridge in darkness, his boots crunching through snow that had crusted over in the extreme cold. The temperature had already dropped to 31 degrees below zero. By morning, it would be colder. And by afternoon, when the fire was sealed and the waiting began, every man in Harlow Creek would be watching for his failure. But Elias did not feel afraid. He felt something closer to peace. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The months of ridicule, the weeks of labor, the sleepless nights of doubt. If the system failed now, at least he would know. And if it succeeded, Margaret's dream would finally be real. He slept deeply that night, warmer than anyone in the valley. The demonstration began at 8 o'clock the following morning. 15 men climbed the ridge, their breath crystallizing in the brutal cold, their faces wrapped in scarves and bandanas. Cornelius brought 2 thermometers to prevent any accusation of tampering. Garrett brought the journal with all previous temperature readings. Douglas Thorne brought his 2 sons, who watched with wide eyes as Elias unsealed the fire chamber and prepared the burn. The fire was the largest he had ever built. 300 pounds of dry pine mixed with 80 pounds of charcoal, stacked carefully on the fire platform beneath the stone mass. He lit it from 4 points simultaneously, watching the flames catch and spread until the entire pile was burning. The heat was immediate and intense. Men standing near the cabin wall could feel it radiating up through the floor within minutes. The chamber temperature will reach 1200 degrees within 2 hours, Elias explained, his voice raised above the roar of the flames. The stones will absorb that heat gradually. When I seal the chamber, they will release it through the floor vents over the next 3 days. If your theory is correct, Cornelius said. The theory is correct. The question is whether the execution matches. They watched the fire burn for 5 hours. Men rotated in shifts, warming themselves inside the cabin while others stood guard at the fire opening. The temperature readings climbed steadily. 600 degrees at hour 1, 900 at hour 2, 1100 at hour 3, 1200 at hour 4, 1250 at hour 5. The stone mass glowed orange, then yellow, pulsing with stored heat. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Elias sealed the fire opening with a granite slab and mortared the edges. The demonstration had entered its second phase. The first temperature reading came at 2 o'clock, 58 degrees inside the cabin, 35 below zero outside, a difference of 93 degrees. The second reading came at 8 o'clock, 54 degrees inside, 38 below outside. The third reading came at 2 o'clock the following morning, 51 degrees inside, 40 below outside. Men took shifts through the night, checking the thermometers every 6 hours, recording the results in Garrett's journal. The skeptics became silent. The believers became bold. And Cornelius Branch watched with narrowed eyes as his promised exposure crumbled hour by hour. By noon of the second day, 30 hours after the fire was sealed, the temperature inside the cabin had dropped to 48 degrees, still warmer than most cabins in the valley, still holding. By midnight of the second day, 42 hours in, the temperature read 45 degrees, a 3-degree drop in 12 hours. The rate of decline was slowing. By noon of the third day, 54 hours in, the temperature read 43 degrees. Outside, it was 33 below zero. Men who had called Elias a fraud now stood in his cabin with their hats in their hands, feeling the warmth rise through the floor beneath their boots. The 72-hour mark arrived at 1 o'clock in the afternoon of January 26, 1874. Cornelius Branch himself took the final reading, pressing his face close to the thermometer to verify the numbers. 40 degrees, he said. Inside. And outside? Garrett asked. Cornelius checked the exterior thermometer. 22 below. A difference of 62 degrees. 72 hours after a single fire. The room erupted. Men clapped Elias on the back, pumped his hand, asked questions faster than he could answer them. Douglas Thorne lifted his younger son onto his shoulders so the boy could feel the warm floor with his own hands. Even Porter Vance, who had dismissed the hypocaust as madness 7 months earlier, stood at the edge of the crowd with something like wonder on his face. Only Cornelius remained unmoved. He stared at the thermometer in his hand as though it had betrayed him personally. "This changes nothing," he said, his voice cutting through the celebration. "One demonstration proves nothing. The stones could crack tomorrow. The system could fail next month. You have shown a trick, not a solution." "Then let me show you more," Elias stepped forward, facing him directly. Let me teach anyone who wants to learn. I will share the diagrams, the measurements, the techniques. Every man in this valley can build his own hypocaust before next winter. No more constant fires, no more wood shortages, no more freezing. And you expect us to trust you after you kept this to yourself for months? I kept it to myself because you would not listen. You called me a fool. You named my excavation a grave. You threatened to take my supplies. Elias's voice hardened. I built this alone because you gave me no choice, but I never wanted to build it alone. My wife dreamed of this, a gift of warmth that could help everyone. That is still what I want. Cornelius said nothing. The room had gone quiet again, waiting. You can keep fighting me, Elias continued, or you can let me help. The choice is yours. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Garrett stepped between them and extended his hand to Cornelius. Take the help, he said. Your family is burning through wood faster than anyone. This could save them. Cornelius looked at Garrett's hand, then at Elias, then at the warm floor beneath his feet. Something shifted in his expression, not acceptance, not friendship, but something closer to resignation. Fine, he said. Teach me. The days that followed were the busiest of Elias's life. Men climbed the ridge every morning to study the hypocaust, crawling into the fire chamber to examine the stone arrangement, measuring the dimensions, sketching diagrams in their own journals. Elias explained the principles patiently: thermal mass, heat retention, airflow dynamics, the importance of dense stone and proper sealing. He showed them how to quarry granite using fire setting, how to build charcoal kilns, how to calculate the stone mass needed for different cabin sizes. Not everyone embraced the system immediately. Some men distrusted anything new. Others lacked the resources or labor to excavate a proper chamber. But by the end of January, 3 families had begun digging foundations on the Roman model. By mid-February, the first hypocaust in the valley, built beneath Douglas Thorne's new cabin, was ready for testing. Elias supervised the fire himself. They burned for 4 hours, sealed the chamber, and waited. 48 hours later, the floor temperature still read 44 degrees. Douglas's wife cried when she felt it. We lost everything in the fire, she said. I thought this winter would kill us. And now? She pressed her palm against the warm floor, tears streaming down her face. How do I thank you for this? Elias thought of Margaret, of the book she had given him, of the dreams she had shared in her final weeks. You do not need to thank me, he said. Just stay warm. The winter broke in late March. The temperatures climbed above freezing for the first time in months. The snow began to melt. The creek thawed, and Harlow Creek took stock of what they had survived. 3 deaths total, Wilson Crane to the cold, and 2, others to accidents unrelated to the weather. Fewer than any winter in the settlement's history. The wood supply had lasted barely, thanks to Elias's teachings and the families that had adopted the hypocaust system. And the plans for summer were already being made. More excavations, more stone quarrying, more fire chambers. By the following winter, half the valley would be heating their homes the Roman way. On the first warm day of April, Garrett Holloway climbed the ridge with a bottle of whiskey and 2 tin cups. We survived, he said, settling onto a log beside Elias's woodpile. Against all odds, we survived. We did. Garrett poured 2 measures and handed one to Elias. To Margaret. Elias paused, the cup halfway to his lips. You never met her. No, but I know she is why you are here. I know she is why you built this. Garrett raised his cup. To the woman who gave you the dream. They drank together in silence, watching the sun set over the valley below. The snow, was melting. The world was thawing. And somewhere beneath Elias's feet, 15,000 pounds of granite sat cooling in the darkness, waiting for the next fire. On the morning of April 15th, Cornelius Branch climbed the ridge alone. He stood at the edge of Elias's property for a long moment, staring at the cabin, before finally walking to the door and knocking. Elias opened it without surprise. He had been expecting this visit for weeks. "I owe you an apology," Cornelius said. The words seemed to cost him something. "I was wrong about you. Wrong about the system. Wrong about everything." "I know. That does not make it easier to say. I know that too." Cornelius looked past him, into the cabin where the floor still radiated faint warmth from a fire 3 days old. "My grandfather came to this territory in 1842. He built his cabin with his own hands, the same way his father built cabins in Pennsylvania. Log walls, stone fireplace, constant fire." He froze, to death in the winter of 1851 when his woodpile ran out. He paused. "My father built his cabin the same way. I built mine the same way, because that was how it was done. That was all I knew. And now? Now I know there is another way, because you showed it to me, because you kept working even when everyone laughed." Cornelius met his gaze. "I am not good at admitting when I'm wrong, but I am trying." Elias extended his hand. After a moment, Cornelius shook it. "Help me teach the others," Elias said. "You know this valley better than anyone. They will listen to you." "They already are. 3 more families started digging last week. Another 4 are planning for May." Cornelius almost smiled. "By next winter, half the settlement will be heating their homes with your Roman system, and by the winter after that, maybe all of them. Then Margaret's dream will be real." Cornelius nodded slowly. "Then her dream will be real." He turned and walked back down the ridge, his boots leaving tracks in the melting snow. Elias watched him go, then closed the door and sat beside the warm floor of his cabin. The fire chamber below was nearly cold now. Another day, and he would need to burn again. But for this moment, in this place, he was warm. He opened the book of Roman engineering to the section on hypocausts and ran his finger over the diagram Margaret had loved. Underground chamber, stone mass, heat retention. A simple principle that had changed everything. One fire lasting 3 days, a gift of warmth. She had been right all along.